The first time I saw my daughter stand up, it was through a grainy security feed on a monitor I hadn't turned on in years. She was supposed to be paralyzed. 5 years in a wheelchair. 5 years of tears, fundraisers, meals dropped at our door, church ladies folding their hands and calling her a warrior. 5 years of me changing bedpans, learning how to lift her without hurting her, waking up every 2 hours because she said her legs burned like fire. On that screen, she didn't look like a warrior. She looked impatient. She pushed herself upright, smooth as breathing, rolled her shoulders once like she'd been stiff from sitting too long, then took 3 steps across my kitchen floor barefoot. Not wobbly, not frightened, not tentative. She moved like a woman who had done it 1,000 times. Then she bent down, opened the lower cabinet, and pulled out the little lockbox I kept my late wife's jewelry in. She knew exactly where it was. I remember how cold my fingers went, how my throat tightened so hard I couldn't swallow. I remember the sound in my own ears, a low rush like wind through a tunnel, because the mind refuses to accept what the eyes are showing it. She lifted the lid, took out my wife's wedding band, and held it up to the light, turning it with 2 fingers like she was inspecting an item at a pawn shop. Then she smiled. Not the smile she used on the neighbors, not the smile she used on me when she needed something. This was private, sharp, satisfied. She slipped the ring into her pocket and, as if she sensed someone watching, she tilted her head toward the camera's hiding place and said, softly, almost tenderly, "It's almost done." Almost done. That phrase chased me for days. It haunted my sleep. It followed me through the house like a shadow that didn't match my body. Because she wasn't talking about her recovery. She wasn't talking about therapy. She was talking about me. And that was only the first lie I uncovered. The second one came in a sealed envelope with my own name printed on it, delivered by a lab in a plain cardboard package. It held a truth I never asked for, a truth I didn't even know to fear until the moment I opened it. Not biologically related. Those words sat on the page like a verdict. My daughter wasn't my daughter. And the moment I understood that, I realized something else. If she had spent 5 years fooling the world, she could spend one afternoon destroying me. So I didn't confront her. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of her. I didn't let my face betray me. I did what men like me do when something breaks and you're not sure how deep the damage goes. I got quiet. I started looking for the screws holding the whole thing together. And once I found them, I started turning. My name is Walter Crowley. I am 71 years old. I've buried a wife, survived a heart attack, and built a decent life with 2 hands that have never been afraid of work. I thought the hardest part of my life was learning how to live in a house after the love of my life stopped breathing in it. I was wrong. The hardest part was learning that the girl I grieved for while she sat in a wheelchair was never injured at all, and that the real reason she chose me wasn't love. It was because she believed I was the kind of man who would let her get away with it. 5 years earlier, the lie arrived in the form of a phone call. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon in early October. I remember because I had just finished replacing a water heater for a neighbor 2 doors down, and my hands still smelled like copper and sweat. I had the radio on in the truck, low. Some talk show arguing about politics. Voices too loud and too certain. My phone buzzed against the cup holder. A number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a young woman's voice trembled on the other end. "Mr. Crowley?" "Yes. This is St. Agnes Hospital. There's been an accident." Hospitals never call with good news. My wife Ruth had been gone for 8 months by then, and I had learned to hate the fluorescent light smell of medical hallways. I was already tightening inside before she said the name. "It's Harper." Harper, my daughter, 26 years old. The only child I had raised in the shadow of losing my own father too young. The child Ruth and I had fought for, prayed for, waited for. What kind of accident? There was a pause. The kind of pause that tells you the person is deciding how to shape the words so they don't cut too deep. She fell. There's spinal involvement. I didn't remember driving to the hospital. I remember fragments. The wipers slicing rain. My knuckles white around the steering wheel. My heart banging like it wanted out of my chest. The way the world narrowed until it was only the thought of my daughter's body breaking. At the hospital, a doctor with tired eyes explained things with careful language. Fractured vertebrae. Swelling, nerve damage. Unknown outcome. Harper lay in a bed, pale under a thin blanket, hair damp and clinging to her forehead. When she saw me, her eyes filled up and she turned her face away like she was ashamed. "Dad?" she whispered, and it sounded like she was saying goodbye. I took her hand. It felt too small, too fragile, too young. "I'm here," I told her. "I'm not going anywhere." She tried to move her legs and couldn't, or pretended she couldn't. At the time, the difference never occurred to me. The next weeks were a blur of paperwork and physical therapy and equipment. A wheelchair, a ramp, grab bars installed in my bathroom, a hospital bed delivered into the room that used to be my den. I emptied my savings without thinking. People like to say money doesn't matter when your child is suffering. That's a nice thing to say when you've never stood at a medical supply store staring at a price tag and realizing that compassion costs real dollars. I sold my boat. I stopped taking the small vacations Ruth and I had once promised each other. I took extra work, even though my joints complained and my back ached in the mornings. My life shrank down to one purpose: keeping Harper safe, comfortable, and hopeful. And Harper played the role perfectly. The crying came at the right moments, the brave smiles when friends visited, the quiet breakdowns late at night when she thought I was asleep. She spoke about the future like a wounded soldier trying to stay alive. "Maybe I'll walk again, Dad," she'd whisper. I believed her because belief was easier than staring into the alternative. The community rallied around her. That's what communities do when a pretty young woman is wounded. They bring casseroles. They donate money. They share her story on social media with words like inspiration and fighter. A local church started a fund for her recovery. A woman named Denise, who ran a nonprofit for medical hardships, came to our house with a camera crew and filmed Harper in her wheelchair, her hands folded in her lap, her voice soft and brave. "I don't want pity," Harper said into the camera. "I just want a chance." I stood behind the lens, feeling proud and broken at the same time. The fundraiser raised $43,000 in a week. I didn't touch a cent of it for myself, not even to pay down the mortgage. It all went into therapy, equipment, specialists. Harper insisted she needed home visits, alternative treatments, a private rehabilitation program 2 towns over that promised miracles and delivered excuses. Harper became a local symbol, and I became the devoted father, the widower who had lost his wife and now carried his daughter. People patted my shoulder in grocery stores. They told me I was strong. They told me Ruth would be proud. I let them believe it. Strength is a performance, too, when the world demands it. The first crack in the story appeared in a place I didn't expect. It happened in the 4th year. By then, Harper had moved beyond the first wave of public sympathy into something stranger. She had followers. She had sponsorship offers. She had people sending gifts to our house, items stamped with words like hope and never quit. She also had a temper. The more her condition became her identity, the more she grew entitled to being cared for, not just helped. Served. If dinner was late, she snapped. If I forgot to refill her water bottle, she accused me of not caring. If I mentioned I was tired, she stared at me like I was stealing something from her. Once, when I asked if she could try doing her arm exercises without me hovering, she stared at me and said coldly, "You're not going to abandon me like Mom did, are you?" Ruth didn't abandon anyone. Ruth died in her sleep, hands folded, as if she had simply stepped into another room. Harper knew that. Harper had watched the paramedics cover her face, but Harper had learned a powerful thing in those years. She had learned that pain can be used as a weapon. The first time she used it properly, it was over my will. I had a small folder in a locked drawer in my desk. Ruth and I had updated our documents years ago: property, accounts, beneficiary designations. Routine planning. Harper didn't know about the drawer until she did. "Dad," she said one afternoon, voice sweet, "can you bring me your laptop?" I rolled the desk chair closer to her hospital bed. She had a tablet of her own, but she insisted on my laptop. Said hers was too small. When I opened it, she asked me to log into my email, then my bank account. Then she watched my hands the way a hawk watches a rabbit. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Relax," she said, smiling. "I'm organizing things. If something happens to you, I need access." I felt my stomach tighten. Nothing is happening to me. She tilted her head. "You're 70. You had a heart attack 10 years ago. You live under stress because of me. Don't pretend it's impossible." That was the first time I felt the shape of her mind. Not fear, not concern, calculation. "I'm your daughter," she said softly. "I'm all you have." It was a statement disguised as comfort. It was a warning. I told her no. I said we would talk about it later with a lawyer present, like adults. Harper's eyes changed. The softness drained out. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "You don't trust me," she said. "That's not what I said." "It is," she replied. "I'm paralyzed, Dad. I can't protect myself. If you die, I'm helpless. And you're sitting here treating me like a stranger." A stranger. The word hit in a strange way, like it had slipped out from somewhere deeper than her anger. I apologized. I didn't mean to. But I was tired, and guilt has a way of making you kneel, even when you're standing. Harper smiled again. The warmth returned. The performance continued. Later that night, I sat in my chair in the living room and stared at Ruth's framed photograph on the mantel. She was laughing in the picture, hair blown by wind, eyes squinting in sunlight. "I don't know who she is anymore," I whispered to the photo. The house didn't answer. The second crack came from a man named Colin Rains. Colin appeared as a volunteer at first. He was in his 30s, fit, polite, with the kind of careful smile people use when they're trying to be liked. He introduced himself as a friend of Denise from the nonprofit, said he wanted to help with transportation for Harper's therapy. Harper's eyes lit up when she saw him. That alone should have warned me. She flirted in subtle ways. She laughed too easily. She adjusted her hair and asked him about his life. She talked about missing romance like she was a heroine trapped by fate. Colin was always careful to seem respectful around me. "Mr. Crowley," he'd say, voice warm, "you're doing an incredible job." I didn't like him, but I couldn't articulate why. Men my age can smell a con the way they can smell smoke. Sometimes you don't see the flame yet, but you know it's there. One evening I came home from picking up groceries and heard voices in the kitchen. Harper's voice, low and intimate. Colin's voice, amused. I stopped in the hallway and listened without meaning to. "You really think he'll sign it?" Colin asked. Harper chuckled. "He will. He has no spine. He lives to feel needed." My heart thudded hard enough I thought it might give me away. Colin laughed softly. "And if he doesn't?" There was a pause. Then Harper said, flat as a blade, "Then I'll make him." I stepped into the kitchen with a bag of oranges in my hand and a smile on my face that felt nailed on. They both turned toward me instantly, expressions shifting into innocence like masks snapping into place. "What are we talking about?" I asked. "Just therapy schedules," Harper chirped. Colin nodded. "Yes, sir, appointment changes." I nodded back, pretending I hadn't heard the truth. But the truth stayed with me. That night, after Harper fell asleep, I pulled out the old box of Ruth's things I kept in the closet. Not because I needed her scent, because I needed to remember what love looked like when it wasn't transactional. And as I dug through old letters and photographs, I found something I had forgotten. A small envelope labeled in Ruth's handwriting. Harper. Birth records. Inside were papers I hadn't looked at in decades. Hospital discharge forms, a birth certificate copy, a list of pediatric visits, routine. Except one sheet wasn't routine. It was a notice from the hospital, dated 3 weeks after Harper's birth, apologizing for an administrative discrepancy in newborn records that had been corrected. At the time, I had skimmed it, shrugged, and moved on. New parents are exhausted. You trust the world to do its job. Now, with Harper's voice in my ears, he lives to feel needed. I stared at that notice until my eyes burned. An administrative discrepancy. Corrected. I didn't know what it meant yet. But for the first time in 5 years, I let myself consider an impossible thought. What if Harper had been lying longer than 5 years? What if the lie didn't start with paralysis? What if it started the day she came home in my arms? The next morning, I made a call I never imagined making. I scheduled a DNA test. I told myself it was paranoia. I told myself it was just to silence a creeping doubt. But doubt doesn't get silenced. It gets answered. I collected my sample in my bathroom, sealed it, and mailed it off like a man sending away part of his soul. While I waited, I did something else. I turned on the old security system. Ruth used to tease me about it. I had installed cameras years ago after a string of break-ins down the street. Small, discreet, pointed at entrances and valuables. After Ruth died, I stopped paying attention to them. Life had been heavy enough without watching it on screens. Now I sat in my study with the monitors glowing, feeling like a stranger in my own home. At first, everything looked normal. Harper in her wheelchair, Harper watching television, Harper posting on her phone with her face arranged into an expression of brave patience. Then, on the third night, at 2:17 a.m., the feed changed everything. Harper's bedroom door opened. She rolled herself halfway out of frame, then stopped. She looked over her shoulder, listening. Then she stood. No wobble, no struggle, no grimace. She stood like she'd never been anything else. She walked out of the room and padded down the hallway toward the kitchen. That's when I saw her take Ruth's wedding band. That's when I heard her whisper, "It's almost done." I sat there in the dark with my hand over my mouth, because if I made a sound, I knew I would wake her, and if I woke her, she would know the game had shifted. And I wasn't ready to let her know that yet. I needed more than anger. I needed proof. The next week became the longest of my life. I played my role. I cooked her meals. I helped her into the shower chair. I nodded at her complaints. I smiled at her supporters. And I watched. Harper got careless in small ways when she thought she was alone. She would stand up briefly to reach something. She would stretch her legs in the dark, then slip back into the chair when she heard my footsteps. Colin visited more often. Their conversations became shorter, tighter, filled with words that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with timing. One afternoon while I was in the garage, I heard Harper on the phone through the open window. "I told you I'm close," she hissed. "He's stubborn, but he's old. He's tired. He's scared of dying alone." Pause. Yes, the deed, the accounts, the life insurance, everything. Another pause. Then her voice lowered, almost excited. "And when it's done, we leave. I don't care what happens to him." Leave? They were planning to drain me and disappear. I had seen men like that in my contracting days. People who knew how to smile and shake your hand while their other hand measured the value of your bones. But this was different. This was my home. This was my daughter. Except, as the envelope arrived in the mail 3 days later, I learned she wasn't. I sat at my kitchen table with the lab report in front of me, coffee cooling beside it. Not biologically related. I read it once, then again, then again. Each time the words stayed the same. I felt like the air had been replaced by water, like I was breathing through cloth. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the collapse of a story I had told myself for decades, that Ruth and I had brought Harper into the world, that we had protected her, that we had built something real. If Harper wasn't mine, then where was my child? And who exactly had I been sacrificing everything for? I didn't cry. I've cried in my life. At Ruth's funeral. At my father's grave. At moments when grief was too heavy to carry in silence. But this wasn't grief. This was clarity. The kind that strips away softness. I folded the report and put it into a manila envelope. Then I did what I should have done the night I saw her stand. I called someone who didn't owe Harper anything. His name was Javier Mendez, a retired state investigator who had hired me years ago for a job repairing a safe room in his basement. We had stayed in touch in small ways. Holiday cards, occasional coffee. Javier answered on the second ring. "Walter?" "Javier," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need help." There was a pause. "What kind?" "The kind you can't talk about in public." Another pause, then a shift in his tone. "Tell me where you are." He came over that evening. Javier was in his late 60s, lean, with eyes that had spent a lifetime noticing what people try to hide. He sat at my kitchen table, listened as I told him everything. The paralysis, the fundraisers, the will pressure, the late night standing, the theft. When I showed him the security footage, he didn't react with surprise the way most people would. He reacted with focus. "Do you have backups?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. We're going to copy everything. We're going to document it properly." "I don't want a long legal circus," I said. "I want it to stop." "It will," he replied. "But you don't get to stop someone like this by shouting. You stop them by taking away their control." He tapped the DNA report with one finger. "And this is a second story." "I don't know what to do with it," I admitted. "We find out where she came from," Javier said, "and where your child went." The word "your child" hit me in the chest like a hammer, because I hadn't let myself say it yet. I had barely dared to think it. But Javier said it like it was a fact. And facts are weapons when you know how to use them. Over the next 2 weeks, we built a plan. Not a reckless plan. Not a violent one. I wasn't interested in doing something that would land me in a cell while Harper walked free. This wasn't about rage. It was about exposure. Harper's entire power came from one thing: belief. People believed her. People pitied her. People protected her. I needed to break that belief in a way that couldn't be repaired with tears. We started by tracking the money. The nonprofit Denise ran had collected donations for Harper's recovery, but no one had ever shown me full records. I had trusted them. Or, more accurately, I had been too exhausted to fight. Javier helped me request statements properly, quietly, through channels that didn't alert Harper. The numbers made my stomach turn. Thousands spent at therapy centers that didn't exist. Payments to consultants with generic names. Reimbursements to Harper for medical travel that matched hotel bookings in cities with no clinics but plenty of nightlife. Colin's name appeared on a few transfers under a shell company. Harper wasn't just faking paralysis. She was laundering sympathy. Meanwhile, Javier dug into the birth records. That administrative discrepancy notice was the first thread. He pulled it carefully, like a man removing a splinter from a wound that had been festering for decades. St. Agnes Hospital had changed hands twice since Harper's birth. Some records were archived, some digitized, some missing. Missing records do not happen by accident in cases like this. We found a name in the old nurse logs: Meredith Lane. Meredith had been on shift the night Ruth gave birth. Meredith had also been investigated years later for irregularities in newborn documentation. The case had been dropped due to lack of evidence. Meredith retired to Florida. She lived under a different name now, but Javier had ways of finding people who thought they were invisible. He came to my house one morning, his face grim. "I found her," he said. "And?" My voice sounded like it belonged to another man. "And Meredith had a daughter," Javier said. "A daughter born within 24 hours of your child." I stared at him, the meaning forming slowly. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying it's possible," Javier replied. "And if it's true, then Harper isn't just a con artist. She's the product of a crime. A baby swap. A theft that had shaped my entire life without me ever knowing. It should have crushed me. Instead, it hardened me. Because now Harper wasn't just stealing my money. She was standing on stolen ground. And I knew something then, with a certainty so cold it felt clean. I wasn't going to let her leave. Harper announced her next fundraiser like it was a victory lap. A gala. A recovery and hope event at a downtown hotel ballroom, sponsored by Denise's nonprofit. A silent auction, speeches, a surprise announcement Harper hinted at on her social media. She told me about it over breakfast, her eyes bright with excitement. "This is going to change everything," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her grip was soft, practiced. "After this, Dad, we'll have enough. I can finally get the treatment." "What treatment?" I asked gently. She hesitated, then smiled. "A specialist program. It's expensive, but it's worth it." I nodded like a man who believed her. Inside, I counted the days. Javier and I prepared quietly. We backed up the footage in multiple places. We printed financial records. We recorded phone calls Harper didn't know were being recorded, where she spoke too freely when she thought she was in control. We also did something else. We set a trap. Harper loved attention. She needed it like air. She couldn't resist a stage, so we gave her one. Javier arranged for a local news crew to attend the gala under the premise of covering a community success story. He also arranged for a private investigator friend to be present, blending in with the donors, cameras hidden in buttons and pins. I did my part by acting like the grateful father. I helped Harper pick a dress, a beautiful blue gown that hid her legs under layers of fabric. She insisted on long gloves, to look elegant in her chair. Denise brought over a new wheelchair for the event, sleek and expensive, provided by a sponsor. Harper stroked the armrest like she was touching a luxury car. "This makes me look like someone worth saving," she murmured. I smiled and said nothing. The night of the gala, I pushed her into the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, flowers arranged with expensive precision. People in suits and dresses, laughing as if tragedy was something you could attend for an evening and then leave behind. Harper's entrance drew attention instantly. Faces turned, smiles softened. Pity bloomed in their eyes. I watched it happen and felt sick. Not at them. At her. Harper waved graciously like a queen among subjects. She leaned into every sympathetic comment. She thanked people for their generosity with a voice that trembled in all the right places. Colin was there, of course. He hovered close, hand on her shoulder, playing supportive partner. Denise worked the room like a conductor, her nonprofit smile fixed and shining. Then the lights dimmed. Denise stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. She spoke about resilience, community, hope. She introduced Harper as the heart of this mission. Applause thundered. Harper rolled onto the stage in her chair, spotlight catching the shine of her hair and the glimmer of tears in her eyes. She began her speech. It was good. I'll give her that. It was practiced, emotional, filled with the right phrases. She spoke about losing mobility, about learning patience, about gratitude for the people who carried her. She looked directly at me at one point and said, "My father gave up his life for me." The room sighed, moved. I stood near the back, hands folded, looking like a man about to cry. Inside, I was steady. Harper reached the part of her speech where she hinted at a miracle. She said, "Tonight, I want to show you something I never thought I'd be able to show you." Her voice shook. The audience leaned in. Colin stepped closer, eyes bright. Harper looked down at her legs, then back up at the crowd. "This is because of you," she whispered. "Because you believed in me." Then she placed her hands on the armrests. She began to rise. In that moment, the entire room held its breath. People leaned forward, hands over mouths. Harper stood halfway, trembling dramatically, like she was fighting gravity itself. And that's when Javier's plan tightened like a noose. Because the new wheelchair Harper was sitting in wasn't just expensive. It had been modified. A small device hidden beneath the seat, invisible to anyone but us, triggered a silent vibration and a sharp, sudden sting, like a snapped rubber band against the back of her thigh the moment she lifted her weight. It wasn't harmful. It wasn't dangerous. It was startling. It was enough to make her flinch. And Harper, who had never trained her body to respond honestly on a stage, did what liars do when the script breaks. She reacted like a healthy person. She jerked back, startled, then instinctively shifted her weight onto her legs, fully to stabilize herself. No collapse, no weakness, just balance, real, casual balance. For a fraction of a second, her face lost the performance. Her eyes widened in alarm as she realized what she had just done. Then she tried to recover. She started to sway dramatically, as if pretending she was struggling. But it was too late. Because the room had seen it. A woman in the front row gasped, sharp and loud, and it cut through the applause like glass breaking. Someone whispered, "She's standing." Another voice, louder, "She's been standing." Harper's eyes flicked toward Colin, panic flashing. And on the ballroom's large screen behind her, the one displaying photos of her journey, the image suddenly changed. The slideshow stopped. The screen went black. Then a video feed appeared. My kitchen. Harper, barefoot, walking. Her hand opening my cabinet. Her fingers lifting Ruth's wedding band. Her mouth forming the words, clear as day. "It's almost done." A ripple moved through the room like a wave of electricity. People turned their heads toward the screen, then back to Harper, then to each other. Denise froze beside the stage, her face draining of color. Colin took a step back like he wanted distance from the fire. Harper stood there, caught under the spotlight, her legs exposed as a fact she couldn't roll away from. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she tried to sit back down, but her hands shook and her knees buckled slightly, not from paralysis but from panic. I walked forward, slowly. The room's noise swelled into confused voices. Someone shouted, "Is that real?" Another voice yelled, "Call the police!" I reached the stage and stopped a few feet from Harper. She stared at me, eyes wide, lips parted, breathing fast. "Dad," she whispered. The words sounded small now, not powerful, not weaponized. I looked up at the crowd, then back at her. In a calm voice, loud enough for the microphone to catch, I said, "You stole 5 years from me." Harper's mouth trembled. "I can explain." "No," I replied. "You can't. And you won't." Then I turned slightly and nodded toward Javier. Javier stepped forward, holding a folder. He spoke into the microphone with the steady, clear tone of a man who has testified in courtrooms and knows how to keep emotion out of evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you are witnessing documented fraud. The footage you saw is time-stamped, verified, and backed up. The financial records we have show misuse of donated funds, transfers to shell accounts, and deliberate deception for personal gain." Denise tried to interrupt. "This is outrageous." Javier lifted a hand. "It will be addressed." Harper's face twisted. Tears formed, fast, familiar. She looked at the crowd like she wanted to pull the old lever, the pity lever. It didn't work this time. People weren't crying for her. They were staring at her like she was something rotten that had been wrapped in silk. And then I delivered the part that didn't just expose her. It removed her last shelter. I took the DNA report from my jacket pocket and held it up. My voice stayed steady even as my heart hammered. "She isn't my biological daughter," I said. A shocked hush fell. Harper's face went rigid. Colin muttered, "What?" I continued, "A nurse at St. Agnes Hospital, on shift the night my wife gave birth, was investigated years later for newborn record irregularities. That nurse had a daughter born within a day of my child." People stared, trying to understand. I let the words land one by one, like stones. "If you want to know why this woman felt entitled to take everything from me," I said, eyes on Harper, "it's because she was raised on stolen truth." Harper's jaw clenched. "Stop!" she hissed. I didn't stop. I looked out at the crowd, at the donors, the sponsors, the reporters now recording with hungry focus. "I don't know where my child is," I said, "but I know this. The person you've been donating to, supporting, defending, has been lying to you, and she has been lying to me, and tonight that lie ends." The room erupted. People shouted. Some pushed toward exits. Phones appeared everywhere like a swarm of insects. Denise looked like she might faint. Colin tried to move toward Harper, but two hotel security guards, already alerted by Javier, stepped in, blocking him. Harper sat on the stage now, the wheelchair behind her like an abandoned prop. She looked up at me with a kind of hatred I had never seen in her before, pure and unmasked. "You think you've won?" she spat, voice low so only I could hear. I leaned closer, keeping my face calm. "I think you forgot something," I said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. I pointed subtly toward the screen still showing her walking in my kitchen. "You built your life on being untouchable," I murmured. "But you're not untouchable. You're just loud." Her breathing quickened. "They'll feel sorry for me again." "No," I said. "They won't." Because in that moment, a woman in the front row stood up, trembling with anger. She shouted, "My sister donated her last paycheck to you. She died last month. She believed in you." Harper's face flickered. Another man shouted, "You took money from my church." A third voice, sharp, "You faked paralysis." The pity was gone, replaced by something harsher, accountability. And once a crowd flips from sympathy to outrage, it doesn't flip back easily. The police arrived within minutes. Javier had made sure they would. Harper tried to cry, tried to plead, tried to paint herself as misunderstood. But the footage played again, and again, and again. On phones now, spreading beyond the ballroom, beyond the city. Harper was escorted out in handcuffs, and for the first time in 5 years, she walked in public without pretending she couldn't. Colin followed, shouting protests, but he was stopped too. Denise tried to slip away through a side door, but Javier's investigator friend intercepted her. It wasn't satisfying in a triumphant way. It was satisfying in a quiet way, the way it feels when a long infection finally drains. After the ballroom emptied, after the reporters chased their stories, after the staff began cleaning up broken glasses and discarded programs, I stood alone near the stage. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was clear. Javier came to stand beside me. "You did what you needed to do," he said. "I didn't do it for revenge," I replied. He looked at me, knowing that wasn't entirely true. I exhaled slowly. Yes, I did. I turned my gaze toward the doorway where Harper had been taken out. Then I said the part that mattered most. But I also did it because somewhere out there, I have a child who was taken from me. And if this lie started at birth, then I've been living the wrong story for decades. Javier nodded. Now we find the right one. The weeks that followed were a storm. Harper's case exploded across local news. More donors came forward. More records surfaced. The nonprofit collapsed under scrutiny, and Denise's perfect smile vanished behind legal counsel and closed doors. I didn't enjoy watching it. I felt something colder than enjoyment. I felt relief. Because the world finally saw Harper the way I now saw her. Not as a wounded girl, but as a predator who had learned how to wear a wound like camouflage. I had to give statements. I had to hand over evidence. I had to answer questions from people who suddenly wanted the truth after they had been so eager to share her lie. That part was draining. It was procedural. It was necessary. But it wasn't the heart of it. The heart of it was what Javier found 2 months later, when he pushed deeper into Meredith Lane's history. Meredith hadn't just been sloppy. She had been paid. It took time to uncover. Old bank deposits. A pattern of small transfers. A connection to a private adoption broker who operated in the gray space between desperation and crime. Javier tracked that broker's records, and one name surfaced again and again. A baby girl listed as placement pending, born the same night as my child with no adoptive parents recorded properly. But one address appeared, a rural town 2 hours away. A family with no children of their own who suddenly had a daughter. Javier brought me the file in my kitchen. I stared at the address until the numbers blurred. "Is she alive?" I asked, voice tight. "We don't know yet," Javier said, "but we can find out." I drove to that town, with hands that didn't feel like mine. The road was long, gray winter skies overhead, fields bare and dormant. My heart pounded with every mile as if it wanted to outrun the car. When I reached the address, it wasn't a grand house. It was modest. White siding, a small porch, a wind chime tinkling softly. I sat in my truck for a full minute, breathing hard. Then I walked up and knocked. A woman opened the door. Middle-aged, tired eyes, kind face. "Yes?" My mouth was dry. "I'm sorry," I managed. "My name is Walter Crowley. I'm looking for someone." She frowned slightly. "Who?" I swallowed. "A woman named Eliza." Her expression changed, not fear, recognition. She stepped back slightly, as if the air had shifted. "You'd better come in," she said quietly. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and wood polish. Family photos lined the walls, and there she was, in one of them. A woman in her 40s, smiling, standing between the couple, holding a child. My knees went weak. "She lives in Chicago now," the woman said softly. "She comes back with her kids on holidays." Kids. My throat tightened. Does she know she's adopted?" The woman hesitated. "We told her when she was 19. We didn't know anything about where she came from. We were told her birth mother couldn't keep her. We were told it was legal." My chest ached. It wasn't. Tears formed in the woman's eyes. I can see that. I didn't blame her. Not fully. People in pain will accept stories that let them build a family. They don't always ask who got crushed under the foundation. "How do I talk to her?" I whispered. The woman reached into a drawer and pulled out a scrap of paper with a phone number. "She deserves the truth," she said. "And if you're who I think you are, maybe you deserve it too." I held that number like it was something holy. That night, in a motel room off the highway, I stared at my phone for an hour before dialing. When she answered, her voice was cautious. "Hello?" My throat tightened. "Eliza?" "Yes." "My name is Walter Crowley," I said. I believe I'm your biological father." Silence. Then, "How did you get this number?" I told her slowly, carefully, about the newborn discrepancy, about the nurse, about the investigation, about Harper. When I said Harper's name, her breath caught. "I've seen her on the news," she whispered. "The woman who faked paralysis." "Yes, I said. She may have been born the same night as you. It's possible. It's possible you were swapped. A long pause. Then Eliza's voice softened, cracked at the edges. My whole life I've felt like something didn't fit, like I was wearing someone else's coat. I closed my eyes, emotion rising like a wave. I'm sorry, I said. I'm so sorry. For a moment there was only breathing on the line. Then she said, What happens now? I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of a lifetime in that question. Now, I said, we meet. If you want to. No pressure, no expectations, just the truth, and whatever you want to do with it. Eliza exhaled. I want to meet. We met 3 weeks later, a small diner halfway between our towns. Neutral ground, a place where the coffee was cheap and the booths squeaked when you shifted. I arrived early and sat with my hands wrapped around a mug I didn't drink. When she walked in, I knew. Not because she looked like me exactly. She didn't. But her eyes moved the way mine do when I enter a room, scanning, reading, assessing. Her mouth tightened the same way Ruth's used to when she was holding back emotion. Eliza stood there for a moment, looking at me like she was trying to recognize a ghost. Then she walked forward slowly. I stood too, heart pounding. She stopped a foot away. And then she did something I didn't expect. She reached out and touched my hand, lightly, like she was confirming I was real. You're older than I imagined, she whispered. I swallowed. I am. Her eyes glistened. I always wondered. About what? About who I came from, she said. About whether anyone missed me. The words cracked something in me. I missed you, I said quietly. Even when I didn't know you were missing. Eliza's lips trembled. She nodded slowly, tears falling now, and for the first time in years my chest loosened. Not because the past was fixed. It wasn't. Nothing could give me back the decades stolen by a nurse's greed, by a system's carelessness, by Harper's cold performance. But something had shifted. The story wasn't only loss anymore. It had a living chapter. Eliza introduced me to her children 2 months later. A boy with my stubborn chin. A girl with Ruth's soft smile. Watching them run around her living room, I felt something I hadn't felt since Ruth died. Not joy exactly. Hope. Harper's trial moved forward in the background of all this. I attended only when I had to. I didn't need to watch her cry on cue. I had seen behind the mask. When sentencing came, the judge didn't call her brave. The judge called her what she was. A manipulator who exploited public compassion and an elderly man's devotion. Harper looked at me across the courtroom, eyes burning. Not remorse. Resentment. As if I had stolen something from her by telling the truth. Maybe I had. I had stolen her stage. I had stolen her audience. I had stolen the only power she ever really had, belief. Afterward, I went home to my quiet house. I sat in Ruth's chair. I looked at her photograph on the mantel. I found her, I whispered. The house stayed quiet, but for once the quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. Because Harper had tried to take everything from me. She had tried to finish what she called almost done. But in the end, she didn't destroy me. She handed me the truth. And the truth, when a man finally accepts it, has a way of turning grief into something sharper. A blade. A key. A door back into a life you didn't know you still had time to live.
My grandpa's worst really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this,